DEI is not about hiring to check boxes, right? DEI is expanding your pool to try to get more qualified candidates, knowing that, if most of your employees come from the Orthodox Jewish community, right, there may be better employees outside the Orthodox community. How are you going to find them?
Let's just hit on the DEI conversation. So was your interest in having that conversation one of those like poke at Elon things, or was it, or do you, like, I'm trying to understand why you're so passionate about it.
So I believe in it. I think it's right. And I love fucking with Elon when he takes such a strong position that I think is wrong. I don't give a shit what Elon thinks about me one way or the other. He doesn't care what I think about him, right? He calls me a racist. He calls me that, whatever, right? But when he starts going anti-DEI, and I know nobody else is going to stand up and say, okay, no, here's the other side of the story, and here's the implementations that I've seen that work, and here's the value, etc. Yeah, why wouldn't I, right? Particularly since it's so important. And look, I'm not saying DEI is perfect. I think, and I'd ask you this question. I mean, my sense is the people who are anti-DEI see it as an ideology, and that ideology is taking over. And because of that ideology, schools in particular are gearing kids to, be liberal, and those liberal senses are then being passed down into new schools, right? And they're teaching our kids, and the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket, and it's anti-racism. The Orthodox community thinks a lot of that like that too. I mean, from the interactions I've had with people I know that are
we're pretty conservative. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I'll tell you, like the general, like I think if you talk about the ideology for a second, the ideology is like this victimized ideology that it seems to push that if you have, right, equality of opportunity, equality of outcome, that's the whole different argument. But like the equality of outcome conversation, like just because you were like everyone has a disadvantage in life, everybody. And like skin color is not the only disadvantage. Some people are smarter than others. Some people look better than others. Like everyone has a disadvantage.
I think you're playing in a false flag, right? Let's talk about equality of opportunity. Where have you ever seen that? Not written, but where have you ever seen that in implementation? In any company that, everybody like showed, okay, it said equality of outcome, right? But let's just say that's truly what they believed, right? Typically when it says equality outcome, it's a school or nonprofit or whatever, as opposed to a business. But let's just say a business says that. How do you even do that? Have you ever talked to anybody who said, now we give examples, some white guy who thinks they got passed over for a job for somebody else, but you've never heard of 5 people from a company saying, yeah, we all get the same, it's more socialist than, capitalist, and everybody gets the exact same amount, has the exact same job, and has the exact same expectations. That's equality of outcome, right? But you never see it in implementation. You never see it in the real world. You only see this, that it's written on the DEI page that we're searching for equality of outcomes. No two people are the same, right? It's impossible for it to actually happen. So when I see people point equality of outcomes, that's just wrong because it should be a meritocracy and no two people. That's just a false flag. Look, we have this red herring thing here that says they want equality of outcomes, but no one ever says, here's the example.
No, I think an example would be kind of like you have to have a certain amount of people from different backgrounds. Like when you have, what are they called? When you have like criterias in hiring that don't necessarily reflect the talent pool.
That's not outcomes. What the argument?
Well, the outcome would be getting the job, right?
No. That's not what they're saying as equality of outcomes, right? Because they're talking about equity, right? And equity is like they show the graphic of the stools for kids that are different heights, and the different height stools so they can see over the fence. And they say, well, everybody wants the equality of outcome, right? Not everybody just has meritocracy and gets a job, because you can't hire based off of quotas. You can't hire based off of race, no matter what, right? So that would just be illegal. They talk about equity being equality of outcomes. They want equality as opposed to equity. But no one ever gives the example of people who are like, here's 7 people, they all had the same outcomes.
Mark, let me ask you, do you think that the White House press secretary is the most competent press secretary?
I don't pay enough attention. I don't care.
Fair enough. All right, I figured I'd give it a shot. Okay.
The reason I'm so passionate about it and adamant about it is because I just think I talk to Bill Ackman, I read what Elon writes. They create this red flag, this false flag, this red herring, right? Quality of outcomes, meritocracy. The people that do the hiring in a lot of cases are the same people, or some of the same people that are posting the anti-Semitic tropes, right? That are posting racist tropes on X. You can't ignore the color of people's skin. Now, legally, you can't use that to make a decision, right? But you can say, I want a diverse workforce, and to get that, I'm going to expand the pool of applicants, right? You can go recruit at HBCU. No, you can go recruit at a rabbinical school, a yeshiva to hire kids to do a certain job, right?
Yeah.
That part's not against the law, but that doesn't mean that's equity, right? And that's diversity. Doesn't mean you're going to get equality of outcomes, because that's impossible. But I won't mention his name, who was big on anti-DEI, he was like, I'm like, they're pushing this ideology. I'm like, who's they? They.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Right. Who's they? Right. And then the next question is, you don't have the balls to stand up to them. They're overwhelming you, right? I mean, I've got 3 kids. You've got young kids. Even if it's a public school, there might be something you don't like. Okay, there's parent-teacher conferences. There's PTAs. There's school boards. We've seen books getting banned. You can do something. Then they find one person who gives a speech, right? One person in Georgia who's black and gives a speech about we need, more of this or more of that, and stands up for themselves. There are activists on every angle in the world, right? And if you just take the activists and show their videos and make it seem like that's ubiquitous, you're just going to try to scare people and give them more, it's just like with your synagogue, right? And what happened there? They're going to post it. Now everybody's going to think this is true. And when they think it's true, they're going to hate Jews more, et cetera, et cetera. That's why it's just insane to me that Jews in particular aren't full throttle in support of DEI, right? Not every implementation is good or well done, but conceptually, just, diversity, just giving everybody a chance, going out there and open the doors, only hiring on meritocracy, equity, putting everybody in position to succeed. If you hire an Orthodox Jew who, when the sun sets on Friday, you're not asking them to run the TPL report, right? That's equity, right? And if that Orthodox Jew happens to also be trans and they like to go by different pronouns, who cares, right? Talking by just like a nick, right?
Yeah.
Could happen, right?
Mark, honestly, I would love to do a full hour with you on this. Obviously, can't right now. I'm actually today's my birthday. I'm 27 now.
Congrats.
Thank you. 27. So still formulating these opinions, but I definitely have a lot more on the underlying ideology and just my personal life experience that I would love to one-on-one with you. But going back to the underlying principles that I think people don't like is this idea that just because it's 2 ideas. It's first of all, it's just because you were disadvantaged at some point in your life, don't turn that into a reason to just become a victim and then try to it's the victim mentality that I think bothers people. I personally, right? You came from nothing, so to speak. Here you are, right? I am 27 years old. Thank God. I moved around all the time as a kid. Like I grew up in Seattle, Washington, Postal Iowa, like all over the place, right? My parents, there's no family money, period, right? And today, thank God, a couple successful companies, a bunch of employees, real estate, I'm happily married, kids, the whole deal. And thank you. And I'm really, really happy with my path. And so does that mean that I don't have an advantage that other people don't have? Of course not. I have two married parents. Like obviously I have a community, and community gives you networks. So obviously there's what there. But at the end of the day, there's other people that have a bunch of advantages that I don't have. And I think that the mentality to be like, because I'm a minority in some sense, or because I have a disadvantage in some sense, means that other people have to go out of their way to look at me specifically, I think is kind of a flawed ideology. And in my personal life experience, I've come across multiple executives, and this is where I think like the people think it's gaslighting a little bit, because everyone's been there where, there's people all the time that they literally will be like, hi, I'm Mendel and I'm important because I'm an Orthodox Jew in healthcare, which is a minority, right? And then I turn to these people off camera and offline, and I'm like, when were you actually like I'm all about you using this to get ahead in your business. I'm all for it. But let's be real. When was the last time you were you were discriminated against because of this minority issue. Like, come on. And the answer is always like, yeah, no, it's never happened. Like, oh, because I'm a woman and this and this. And I'm looking at this woman, I'm like, let me ask you a question. You are a very successful woman. You have a winning personality and a good product, right? Maybe I'm crazy, but when I look at you, that's all I see. Like, there's no, oh, you're a woman, you're a man, you're this, you're that.
That's great, right? But the corollary of that is saying, well, Barry Diller owns this media network. Bob Iger is Jewish. He runs Disney. Jews must control everything, right? You can't, anecdotal examples don't prove anything one way or the other. That's not, so when you're running a company, as your company gets bigger, you'll have to determine, the best way to find the best people. And when you're small, you're going to choose from your local community, other people people you trust. But as you get much bigger, you need to expand the pool of applicants. You're going to want to find people that other people aren't looking for, right? You may determine that, you need to reach other communities, and you need people who have unique backgrounds that don't look like you and give you different experiences, right? Those are things as your companies grow, and this company is much bigger than mine by a long shot, where DEI helps you understand that that's a benefit for your business, right? Okay. When somebody stands up and says, you know what, I'm discriminated against for A, B, C, or D, there are people who are going to take advantage of every circumstance no matter what.
Yeah.
Right. And on the flip side, they're going to say, hey, are you you know what MOT stands for? No, really?
Remember MOT? Remember the tribe. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So old school Jewish, right? Where it's like, I get emails all the time. Hey, I'm Jewish, da, 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 da. Hey, my yeshiva needs this or that. And because I'm Jewish, there's the expectation, right? And I have no problem with that. I can say yes or no based off the merits of what's going on. And then I'll get churches and I'll get, whatever, right? And so each one, it's just anecdotal. You can't generalize across the board. So because these people are playing the victim all the time, then everybody that's like them is playing the victim. And this whole ideology is causing all these people to play the victim. So I don't like the ideology. Those are non sequiturs, right? They don't feed off each other. Like, I even read that book, oh my God, by Chris Rutho, I think his name is, right? The whatever revolution, the Cultural Revolution, where he talks about the history of liberals and the Black Panthers and these guys.
The one that Bill Ackman said was like really enlightening?
Yeah, it wasn't enlightening at all to me. I mean, it was interesting, right, to get the history and stuff, the Black Panthers and the protests at colleges. It was interesting from a historical perspective. But then he goes on to say, effectively, it doesn't work. Because ideology like that doesn't work. People still have free will, free mind in this country to make their own decisions. You want to play the victim? It's like Fiddler on the Roof, to overuse Jewish things. It's just like the Fiddler on the Roof. And there's who's the guy? Have you ever watched Fiddler on the Roof? Damn.
I'm sorry.
Different generations.
I can sing a couple of the songs for you.
Yeah, but there's always the beggar, right? Who always tells you why he needs to beg, right?
Right.
And so people are gonna make their own excuses. And okay, those are the types of people I'm not gonna hire. If you play the victim, I'm not gonna hire you. Now, right. What gets you to play the victim? If there's more of those because of this ideology, maybe, right? But is it ubiquitous? No. Is there some?
Okay.
No.
Okay, but so let's start here. We can both agree that there are DEI departments at companies, and they seem to be growing in both numbers and size, right?
Well, they're probably not growing as much anymore because of all the backlash. I mean, that's had an impact, but I get your point.
Like, I see more and more on LinkedIn every day, but anecdotally, right? And so I think, and this is, I commented a couple times on X, because I think this is where maybe the fundamental misalignment is. I don't think anyone would disagree with you that if it were to be in your business's best interest, be able to approach a more diverse crowd, right? Great example is in movie directing, right? There's this famous, there's a clip that I saw that was like viral a while back, and I'm not very good with Hollywood. I don't know all the names and stuff, but there was a Black producer, and someone asked him why he directed this movie that was about Black people. And he's like, it's not a race thing, it's a cultural thing. And his example, which to his point, I completely don't understand. He's like, me and this guy understand what a hot comb feels like going in your hair Sunday morning. No idea what that means. Those are his words. And that was his point. And he's like, let me ask you, who's the famous Italian producer or writer, director, whatever. He's like, whatever. He's like, this guy who's not Jewish could have done Schindler on the Roof, right? Schindler's List, right? Schindler on the Roof. That would be a wild film. Schindler's List, right? And he's like, and this other guy could have done some Italian movie. And he's like, but they didn't because there's cultural differences there, right? And that makes perfect sense. You're going to make a movie about Jewish people. You probably want to understand Jewish life, which, by the way, when it comes to the Orthodox community, is always hilarious to me, to your point, because they never have any clue. They'll have like the wrong yarmulke with the wrong type of community, the wrong payas with the wrong this, and it's a total mix-up, right? They have like a reformed tallis with long payas, and it's like, what is going on here, right? And so yes, you want those cultural understandings. So that's you made that point, and I think that's a very clear point. I don't think anybody would disagree with you. I think that where it gets different is when you consider, it's two things. I think the question is, everyone will agree that having a diverse view is an advantage. I think the question is, if a lack of diversity, I am a straight white male, right? Is my lack of diversity a disadvantage to me? That's one question.
No, it's irrelevant. It's your skills that make the difference, right? Yeah, your unique backgrounds, being able to tell what goes with what, right? As an Orthodox Jew, right? Being able to understand healthcare. But taking somebody from the Orthodox community is a unique set of characteristics, right? Particularly in New York, that may bring a different viewpoint. Now, it's not because you're Jewish, it's because where you grew up and the culture and the people and all that kind of stuff that makes you different, that might be a perspective that would help a business, right? Is it wrong to hire you for those reasons?
Right. No, not at all. And so that's point number one. So great, we're aligned there. Point number two, I think, is where I think it makes a difference, is if what you're saying, spot on. If I'm trying to, healthcare is a great example, right? Social terms of health, contextual elements to people's healthcare. There are cultural things that make a difference in people's health, right? And those are really specific to the community. So if I'm a healthcare company, not only is it good for me to have diversity on my team, I must have diversity on my team, because I will never understand what the 67 African American feels like living in his neighborhood. I will not understand that, and I will not be able to meet those needs. And that's why, especially going back to the original concept, when you go to value-based care, that's like super, super important. You need that, right? Because you need to be able to understand those. So absolutely. But that's very different. Having that end result, and that's the purpose for having diversity, that's understandable. I think that's very different than saying there's not sufficient representation on the team for the team's sake, not for the client's sake. This team is too white, right?
Well, it depends what business you're in, right? It's not so much based off of color, it's based off of experiences, et cetera, right? It could be this team's too young. It's, we don't have enough youth. We don't have enough age and experience or wisdom, right? There's 1,000 different ways to do it. But like I've said on X a million times, businesses are going to make those determinations for themselves. You have to make that determination. Now, if you think that, there's quotas, no. They want to pretend. There's a lot of people there's a difference between a goal and a quota, right? So if you have 10,000 people working for you and you'd like in your management, you only have 3 women or 3 black people or 3 whatever, right? And you'd like to see more of those, that's not a quota per se.
Why would I want to see more? Why?
Because diversity of experiences, right?
No, let's assume I have the diversity of experiences, but I don't have the diversity of gender, race. And by the way, Mark, this is coming from a guy that my main company that has 25 employees, every single one is women, okay? So just FYI.
And I'm not suggesting one way or the other, but if the question is why, that's what management's decided, right? That's what the business decided, because the flip side is, if it's not needed and they're just hiring for the sake of hiring to show off and make it look like it's diverse, they're not going to have qualified people. The people that work with them are not going to want to work with them because they're having to do too much work or the culture's not working. There's going to be 1,000, I'm managing 25 people. If 2 of them don't get along, then 8 of them are not going to get along, right? And for whatever the reasons are that they're not getting along, you will have a problem. And that department, that group, that floor, that, cul-de-sac in your offices, right? The 4 cubicles together, they are going to have a problem. And that problem is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the whole suggestion that, well, if it's all good, why would I need more of anything, right? Why not go with just more of what I have because it's working? Well, management just makes that decision. And if they feel they need more diversity and experience, What's wrong with that? And if when they hire them and they give them and the equities there and they give them the tools they need to succeed, what's wrong with that? And if the inclusion is there, so it just so happens that they hired the most qualified person who was trans or whatever, right? And they gave them the support they need. What's wrong with that, right? Look, I get that if you're a white man. I remember when I was getting ready to go to college, and there was the Bakke case, I think it was at UCLA, where they gave an advantage to a black kid over a white kid, right, in terms of admission, like kind of what we saw with Harvard. And as I thought about it, it's like it doesn't matter one way or the other. People are going to make their own choices. The schools are going to make their own choices. I get to choose what school I go to that would let me in at the time and that I could afford, because I knew I was going to have to work anyways to pay for school. Who I hire, who I work for, who I partner with, we all make our own choices. I think where the disconnect is the perception that there's some master ideology that has this incredible level of influence and control. Who is it, right? And on the flip side, if Elon hates DEI so bad, why is his company minority majority, first of all, right? But let's just put that aside. Who is Elon afraid of that supports this ideology, this DEI ideology? I don't look at it as an ideology. I've never felt pressured one way or the other in any one of my businesses or situations to hire someone black or orange or green or yellow or whatever, right? I just make my own business choices. And as I've learned over time, the more diverse experiences I have, the better it is for my business. There's no overriding ideology. I mean, when you think of DEI ideology, who do you think of? Who's the first person that comes to mind that supports this ideology?
Look, I'm by no means the subject matter expert. I would think the Biden admin and general and educational institutions. I never got a letter in the mail saying that, hey, excuse me, you only have. And by the way, back to my example, I didn't try to hire women. I tried to hire really, really good care coordinators, and it happens to be, you know what I mean? So to your point, 100%, and that's the way to go. I think that we're having a factual argument, which there's no point in having here because, which is this either exists in policy or doesn't exist in policy. But I think it's the intent that really matters. And if the intent is, to your point, if the intent is to have a better product, have a better system, then I would like to find the person that would argue with the fact that, that's the way to go, to hire, then you end up with diversity. That's fantastic. But if the intent is diversity for the sake of diversity, because if I don't show that my team is diverse, then I'm a bad person, which I do think is a pervasive mentality with employers. I mean, I definitely do think so. I think it would look.
Doesn't the free market and capitalism solve that?
So to your point, you're saying that if I go around hiring a bunch of people that are less talented simply because of diversity, then I'm going to fail. And I think that you're correct. I think we're seeing that.
Problems. You're not going to fail. You're not going to fail necessarily because if it's a big company, but you're going to have problems, right? That show themselves economically one way or the other.
And I think we're seeing that with education, no? Isn't that what's going on? Aren't the Ivy Leagues kind of collapsing because of rot in the institution with this kind of ideology for so many years, and now it's coming to a head?
Look, Harvard, I think, put Harvard aside, and MIT, the brand names, the big brand Ivy schools are in their own world, right? I don't pay attention to them, but based off of what I've read, and based off of what Ackman said and everything, I can see in the institutions, that's part of their mission, right? But at the same time, they have 100,000 people applying in that school, right? And they have to make choices on what they feel creates the best graduate. And if it was only based off of SAT scores and you all have one or two or, three demographics that represent the whole school, are the kids that attend there going to be best prepared and get the best education?
1 second. Why not?
Why not? Because you're going to have to deal with people in different ways in the real world, right? And preparing yourself for the real world, I think, is a fundamental requirement of going to college. Learning to show up and learning to deal with unique people and unique circumstances, I think better prepares you. I'm not going to, if there's a college that is if there's the college that follows one ideology, I'm not going to hire from them because that's not what I want, right? But that's my choice, right? I like the fact that there were a lot of different types of people where I went to school, where my kids go to school. I think that's a positive because learning to deal with people from different cultures is a win, is valuable, I think, to my kids.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that there's value to letting in less qualified, and I think this is the argument. I think it sounds like you're saying that it's worthwhile to let in people that are less qualified, less talented, less hardworking, less for whatever reason, just for the sake of a better, well-rounded human interaction experience.
Assuming that there are specific metrics that can identify quality and qualification, right? Now, if you think that SAT scores or ACT scores does that in and of itself, maybe add grades, maybe add, a couple paragraphs that they've written in an application, and you can absolutely, with 100% accuracy, determine the most qualified, then we'll disagree, right? Because there are soft skills. Like I have a company called scoutable.com. They make you play a video game, and they correlate the performance in that video game to people who are high performing within specific industries. Because the whole concept is you're not just by grades or test scores or even, longevity within a job, you might not find the best programmer because the game helps understand how they think about certain things, right? So it's a different soft skill ability to find quality employees. And it's the same, it could be used for students as well. People who, and not to generalize, the people I've talked to that say, okay, you're bringing in less qualified people, the presumption is, and where I disagree is, ACT or SAT score and grades, and even the quality of the school you attend potentially, and your essay is all the information you need to determine who's more qualified. Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. Depends on the application. Like I was never a good student, and I consider that to my advantage in the real world.
Okay, so you're not into a school, yet here you are being successful and maybe being around a student who's maybe not done as well with their grades, but is obviously motivated and business oriented. That would be a benefit to fellow students.
Correct. But I still wouldn't expect Harvard to lower their academic.
They just opened them. They didn't lower them, right? Academics, my grades in high school weren't amazing by a long shot. I dropped out, right? But I showed that I was driven and I was curious and I loved to learn. And that's what got me in when you talk to them. If it was just academics, I wouldn't have gotten into Indiana. I didn't get into Georgetown, right? If you want the most qualified person, you've got to open up to more than just the checklist items that people talk about when they deal with qualifications. If I'm hiring somebody and I want entrepreneurial skill, I'm not asking for your grades from college.
So, okay, I hear your point. They've broadened, your argument is that they haven't lowered their expectations, but they've broadened the expectations to allow people that don't necessarily fit the educational smart, book smart kind of mold to come in to better round their students. That's the argument.
With your company, right? You have 25 women who work for you, right? Now, when you sat down to hire them, you didn't send out have you fired anybody? Has anybody left? So think back to those people, right? When you hired them, you didn't hire them thinking they were unqualified, did you?
Right.
And have you learned from the people you've had to fire on what works and what doesn't work when you hire?
Absolutely.
Right? That's the point, right? So now you look at different skill sets and different traits that allow you to determine who's the most qualified. And when you look at that realm of different traits, it's not quantitative at all, is it? It's not, maybe how many years you worked at one job, whatever, but you've learned more on how to interview people and how to determine qualitatively who's the most qualified. And that's the whole point. When you have 100 people applying for your next job, there is no one metric or two metrics that you use to pick who's the most qualified, is there?
No, but to the same point, I'm a business that does care coordination. So I wouldn't want a creative dancer or an artist to come on the team just to learn that that's not.
Exactly, right? So you're not going to hire somebody because they don't meet those qualifications, but your qualifications evolve over time. It may well be in 3 years because of AI, you need to be able to be great at prompts. And so the person who's qualified today won't be the least bit qualified in 3 years, and you're going to have turnover, right? So who knows? You're going to have to broaden your pool of people that you interview. But the bigger point is when you look at the range of people that you interview, there is no one set of metrics to determine who the most qualified is. You end up talking to them to try to get a feel. And to say, it's just a meritocracy, when those people walk in the door for you to interview, you don't know just by looking at them or their demographics or anything who's going to be the most qualified. And more often than not, we all have turnover, and you're going to learn the hard way who's the most qualified. And you're going to talk to the people who work for you, given you only have 25 employees, and you're going to ask them, who do you know that can fit this position for somebody who just left? And that's going to be how the referral will carry greater weight than anything on a resume, right? So again, the point is, in diversity, it's not about equal outcomes in hiring. It's hiring the best person, but there is no one metric to determine who's best. You learn and you evolve and you try different things to figure it out. Diversity, the D, means you expand your pool. So maybe there's somebody somewhere else that you didn't even consider, because yesterday, before you had, this turnover or that turnover, or a year ago, this was your criteria. Now you learned, and now you found this new person who changed your criteria again because they're great, and people like that person and their experiences are great too. There is no one metric. So when someone says, well, DEI, you're not hiring the most qualified person, it's not a meritocracy. They've never hired multiple people in their lives.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Would you disassociate gender and race from diversity?
I mean, it doesn't really matter one way or the other, right? It's life experiences.
Right. That's my point. It should be about your experience, because you can hire an Orthodox Jew to fill, to relate to the Jewish Orthodox community, but he grew up in Montana all by himself, you know what I mean, and doesn't have any association, and so you're putting a square.
DEI is not about hiring to check boxes, right? DEI is expanding your pool to try to get more qualified candidates, knowing that, if most of your employees come from the Orthodox Jewish community, right, there may be better employees outside the Orthodox community. How are you going to find them?
Right, but I'd be hiring for experience.
Right.
I'd be hiring for a point. I'd be hiring for cultural relevance. I'd be hiring to connect with my demographic. I wouldn't be hiring for something as superficial in my estimation as gender, race. I'm looking for equality.
You can't do that, right? So that's the whole point. The anti-DEI folks that I've come in contact with, right, are like, it's quotas. I got to have X amount of this. That's not how it works, right? Now, if you go to the colleges and they want to have that mix because that's what they think is going to create the best student and the best outcomes, that's a different conversation. And there was just the Supreme Court ruling that said, okay, you can't do it this way, right? They may have thought it was better. They have to change their business model. I would have liked their old business model better, because I want, my kids to be around a diverse group. I think that prepares them better for life. They deal with it the way they do. But a college is not the same as your businesses or my businesses, right? They're run with completely different objectives. And any for-profit business that runs just based off of numbers, I got to have this mix this way, it's going to show up in the numbers. And where you see companies saying, I want more women or more this, that's where they've made, they didn't say I needed 100% women or 100% minorities. They said I wanted more. IBM, I think, came out and got a lot of shit because they wanted to increase their minority representation by 30% of women, but not including Asians because they're overrepresented in the technology industry, right? But they made that determination that they wanted more because someone decided that they needed different viewpoints and different backgrounds. They didn't say they had to hire 7 women this year. And by the way, the big companies with more than 100 employees have to file this thing called EEO-1, right? Where you have to give the actual number of employees every year by demographic, including, mixed race. And so you can go and look at these companies and see what they actually hired. And there are companies that have said, here's our goal, we'd like to hire more of this. And in reality, they hired less. Because even though they tried and they increased the pool of applicants, they weren't able to find qualified people. And, people leave, people retire, whatever, get sick, so you're going to have turnover in those numbers. There's no, in all of this though, it's not like we said, well, this is what so-and-so told us to do, right? It's not like I think the IBM CEO feels pressure because, again, my business or his business and any other business is either going to be successful or it's not. Either the stock price is going up or it's not. And if you look at the top market cap companies in this country, they all have DEI programs. And you talk about go woke, go broke. I see a whole lot of companies, more companies go red, stay red, right? Experience red ink, than vice versa.
Right, but maybe that's just the flip side of the same ugly coin. Maybe that's just going in the opposite direction, which you end up with the same thing. At the end of the day, if you select for hard right winger, you're still not creating a good, capitalistically minded platform.
Right, exactly right. And that's the whole point. The market will tell you if you're doing the right thing. And bigger companies can absorb some losses and the stuff. And if you're that bureaucratic a company and you have 100, 200, 300,000 employees, you're bureaucratic to some level, but your systems and your managers, you don't hide that stuff forever, right? And it shows up at some point. If your turnover rate is going up, you're going to have to respond. If you can't hire people because everybody says, I don't want to work there, you know what they're doing? They have this DEI program where, it's exact quotas, and no, people aren't going to work there. But so much of the anti-DEI crowd, they just sit around and they say, look at this guy, look what they were saying. They tag me on extra threads, right? We're like, this guy said this. Yeah, it's ridiculous, but he's an activist trying to make a point, right? Just like Elon talking about electric vehicles, right? He's making that point all day, every day, and there's nothing that's going to influence what he says. If you're an activist that thinks there aren't enough African Americans within the workforce in general, you're going to be pounding that table on that. If you think there's not enough Orthodox Jews, you're going to be pounding that table. If you're going to think, there's racism or anti, you're going to be pounding. That's what activists do. That's what they're supposed to do. That's why they're activists and not passives, right?
Yeah. Okay. That I think that's a really, really good point. And I do think that people don't have the the contextual understanding to be able to delineate those kind of things. Are you a Seinfeld guy? Did you watch Seinfeld?
Yeah.
So you remember Mickey, the little person on the show?
Yeah.
So I had him on the podcast a while back because he's a big activist for the people, the disability community. And he was basically saying, he's pushing for all these quotas and all these really hardline things. And we kind of had this similar conversation where I was like, don't you think that's kind of like at a certain point, like at the end of the day, you guys are what percentage of the population? Like, we're not going to build a world for disabled people, right? Like, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be inclusive and sensitive and build options, but like, you're not going to build a world with ramps instead of stairs. You're just not going to do that, right? And so like, at what point and he said the same thing that you just said. And so I actually really appreciate it. He's like, look, to a certain extent, we're shooting for the stars so that it's heard and so that we're making a point. And I think
that's all the time, right? If you're an activist and you're not, your life's work is activism and it's not a moonshot, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Love it. Mark, you're an absolute beast. I appreciate you doing this.
Does that change your perspective at all?
You changed my perspective at all. I think that I still believe that there are people, to your point, like we just said, I think there's a lot of activists out there, and I don't believe that something as superficial as race or gender should sway you one way or another. You shouldn't discount somebody because of race and gender. You shouldn't consider somebody.
That is illegal to do.
I know that, but that doesn't. Right. So we agree there. Okay. That I think I've always seen, I think, the middle argument from your point. I don't think you're saying that this reality doesn't exist. You're just saying that if you're trying to create a purposeful, a successful company or successful organization, and you want to divert, then diversity literally means diversity of perspective, so that you can reach a broader market, and that's obviously going to be a positive thing. And if that means that your team is more diverse in regards to their culturally and communally, and then yes. I think you've clarified it for me where you are.
And in terms of ideology, who do you think is driving the DEI ideology? Is there any person you can point me to, or because I know who's against it? That's always really clear on Twitter, right? But who's driving this that has such cultural influence that companies are responding to them? I just think people glom on. When I talk about Twitter being an echo chamber, right? It's so easy just to grab things from Twitter and go with it. And if you go with it, you look for somebody who reinforces your perspective. And that happens, and people get stronger and stronger and stronger in their perspective. And so I think that happens a lot on X. And you get the exact opposite conversation with anecdotal examples of people who disagree with it on threads, right? And even on LinkedIn. And so, I just don't see this big ideological wave that's taking over the country. It's like you talk about, little people, right? Not being a big percentage of the population, like trans people. Like the whole thing with Bud Light. That person had 250,000 followers. People didn't find out about it by following her feed, right? They found out about it because Fox and all of them and X just beat the hell out of it. It's just like, the synagogue thing with the tunnels. They just beat the hell out of it. And yet people use that as a foundation for their beliefs. And to me, that's the underpinning of the anti-DEI movement, where they get certain people just pounding it, and that reinforces it. And, unless you tell me this is, the experience you've had with these 10 people having equal outcomes, literally having equal outcomes, right? Or this person really having all this influence over so many people, and they just can't resist following them like a cult, like MAGA, right? Why are these people following Trump? Because he's Trump, and that's what they've all agreed to do. I just don't see it.